Ahead of the last ever episode of All Saints tomorrow night at 12:30, we'll be catching up with the team for brilliant medical drama a little bit later on. Now though, a little bit earlier than usual, it's time to join Vincent Browne for his election coverage. We've an extended Tonight with Vincent Browne.
The first big political debate of the election campaign with representatives from the main political parties. We discuss the issues, the tactics, the personalities and the polls for election 2011. That's on the Tonight programme after the break. Campaign 2011 with what I hope will be a spirited debate on the issues, the strategies, the polls and the personalities. And with us are Pat Rabbitte of the Labour Party, James Riley of Fine Gael, Anya Carr, political correspondent of the Irish Independent, Owen O'Brien of Sinn Féin and Thomas Byrne of Fianna Fáil, and he's one of the ogre generation of Fianna Fáil who was not promoted this afternoon. We'll be joined later by Veronica Walsh, organiser of the Dublin Current Affairs Meetup and a political tweeter for our preview of tomorrow morning's newspapers and for our review of your tweets and texts and emails. If you'd like to comment on the programme, you can text us at 53131 and place the word Tonight before a comment, or send us a tweet at #FinB or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. A live blog is being run on the website politico.ie. Several people have asked me to comment on Joan Burton's remarks about me in the Irish Mail on Sunday yesterday. All I have to say is that I'm surprised. Joan has been one of the best public representatives in the Dáil in the last 4 years and longer. She, along with Pat Rabbitte and Richard Bruton, has managed to tease out the implications of the banking crisis in a way that has made it intelligible to many of the rest of us. Her command of Labour's finance brief has been very impressive, and she has been a great help to journalists, including me, over the last while. And she also has been a valued participant on this programme, and I hope she will continue to be. It's not for me to say or to judge the fairness of her remarks concerning me, but I invite viewers to look at the programme of this day last week, and it's on the homepage of the TV3 website. That's www.tv3.ie. Now on to tonight's programme. Pat, what are the big differences in this campaign between Fine Gael and Labour? Why should somebody vote Labour rather than Fine Gael?
I think the differences between the three parties have been narrowed by the fact that our economic sovereignty has been ceded outside of the country, and therefore we are trapped in that straitjacket until it is renegotiated. Clearly, the Labour Party would put more emphasis on protecting the most vulnerable in our society. Our priority is job creation. But before and proceed to all of that is the requirement to renegotiate a very bad deal that has been foisted on us by a very bad-tempered European Central Bank. The reasons for their disagreement with us and chagrin with us have never been properly explained. But when they pulled down the shutters, they pulled down the shutters with a vengeance and imposed a deal on us in terms that deny us the flexibility to stimulate our own economy and impose an interest rate on us that is punitive. And that has to be the first priority of the new government, to mount a diplomatic assault on the councils of the European Union.
But that's
and the ECB.
That's Fine Gael are committed to doing that too, and indeed, as you know, Michael Noonan and Enda Kenny have been to Brussels to commence that process.
Yeah. Well, I hope they are, because it has to be the priority of any new government, whoever comprises the government. Whoever comprises the government, that has to be the first. That has to be the first port of call. That's not to say that it's going to be dealt with speedily or quickly.
But that's not an issue of difference between Fine Gael and Labour.
Well, maybe it is in the terms of what we want to do. I mean, for example, one of the things that we want to do is to have the flexibility to devote resources to the question of job creation, and given that credit lines are frozen at the moment, that puts into sharp focus the necessity for the proposal that we advanced some 18 months ago now for a strategic investment bank that would fund small businesses to get employment moving again and to retain the employment that we have. That's a very high priority for us. I mean, you know...
Again, that doesn't seem to me. Fine Gael is in favour of job creation strategy as well. Well, it seems to be the same.
Yeah.
You're ad idem on that issue. So.
I have no objection at all,
So
Vincent.
That's not a good reason for voting Labour rather than Fine Gael, is it?
No, it is, yeah. I have no objection at all to Fine Gael following Labour policy. That's fine by me. But I'm setting out what our priorities are.
And no, Pat, my question was, why should anybody vote Labour rather than Fine Gael in this coming election campaign? You've given us two reasons which don't address that question.
Oh, I think they do. I think they do. And I think, you know, the meeting the target for the fiscal deficit, I think that if Fine Gael managed to be in government on its own or managed to be in government with a like-minded party, I think the cuts would be far more severe and far more deep than if they're in government with the Labour Party.
That's because you're in favour of biasing the fiscal readjustment more in the area of taxation than in public expenditure.
Well, it is also about the duration of coming into compliance with the Growth and Stability Pact requirements, and we will publish our document on that on Thursday, and I don't especially
Again,
want to go
Pat,
into the detail.
That doesn't seem to me to be a big deal, because nobody seriously expects that whichever party is in government, the target of 2013 now, 14 now, will be met, that it will spill over. So that again doesn't seem to be a persuasive reason to vote Labour rather than Fine Gael. Well, I think, or is there any reason?
I think it's very persuasive, Vincent, if you were a person on a very low income and you had to pay the universal social charge. I think you'd appreciate the difference between alleviating that and not alleviating it. Fine Gael agreed, for example, to take $6 billion out of the public finances. Oh no, hold on, now you asked me for a difference. Let me give you a difference. They wanted to take $6 billion out of the public finances in agreement with Fianna Fáil in the last budget. We felt that that was too severe, that would put further deflationary impact on the economy. And of course, when you had to find the $6 billion, which is a nice abstract figure until you find where you're going to make the actual cuts, people who got their paychecks this week, or people who got their paychecks for the month at this week, appreciate exactly how severe it is. If you have a cleaning woman who gets €95
the universal
per week.
Social charge. The question is, would Labour get rid of it, or and would Fine Gael retain it? And from what, and I venture with trepidation into this area, because I got harangued on this issue a week ago, but Eamon Gilmore said on the Late Late Show a few months ago that he would favour no changes to a budget introduced by Fianna Fáil before the next election, before the election.
Well, I think that Eamon Gilmore hopefully will have 4 or 5 budgets of his own to bring in, and we will make the changes there to suit our approach to the public finances and rectification of the public finances. In any event, he subsequently said in an interview with Sean O'Rourke,
he backed off a little bit,
that there may well be issues that would come up as a result of the budget that we would have to look at. There will be a second finance bill, Vincent, to deal with a number of matters, and that second finance bill remains to be seen in terms of its content.
Anything you've said is really a rallying cry to the would-be supporters of Labour to vote Labour rather than Fine Gael. It seems sort of milk and watery.
Well, the people will judge that, Vincent.
You could come up with some better reason than that.
I'm sure I could if I didn't have the weight of the IMF and the ECB down on top of me. You can't ignore that, Vincent. You can't tell the Irish people lies about what we can do. We can't walk away from the ECB, IMF. We can't walk away from the European Union. We are where we are. The outgoing government has plunged us into a debt problem, the likes of which we could never have imagined.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have to continue to maintain the normal services of the state, whether it's health or education, pay public servants and so on. And I would love to be here to tell you the kind of things that Labour would like to do if we were able to govern, if we were able to raise our own monies, if we were able to make expenditure decisions, which we can't as a result of that.
But given all that, is there not a case
agreement.
then to give the Fine Gael an overall start and to help with it?
I think that 300,000 public servants would regret that day if you let Leo Varadkar loose with his cleaver. I think they would regret it. I think people who are dependent on services in the social services area for children with autism and for the various different branches of the social services would regret it. Labour may get very little credit, but it will be a restraining force.
And what's the reason for voting Sinn Féin rather than Labour?
Okay, I think there's a very long list of reasons why people should...
No, don't give us a long list. Give us two.
Well, the first obvious one is the issue that Pat is talking about. We're the only party to say that, in fact, we do have a real choice in this election. We don't have to accept the EU-IMF deal that was negotiated by the outgoing government. We don't have to accept the punitive interest rates that come with that deal, or the detailed policy prescriptions that are going to plunge the economy and our society further into recession. So very clearly we're saying elections are about choices, and an incoming government, if Sinn Féin was involved, would be about rejecting that deal, not drawing down the money, and outlining an alternative economic strategy.
There's 30 billion in the pension reserve fund, along with the monies in under the bed
funds in the central bank.
The NTMA, and that will get us through the year. It's less than the 30 billion now, it's about 24 billion, but that'll get us through the year.
No, it is not. It is 18 billion, 12 of which is pledged in the 4-year programme.
Which is precisely the reason why we need to say no to the programme. There's about 14
but there's a little problem. To deal with the fiscal problem, all right,
Absolutely.
the fact that we're spending more than we get in taxation.
Absolutely.
But there's a little matter to do with the capitalisation of the banks.
Sure.
And I heard Jerry Adams floundering all over the place on radio yesterday on that issue. Did you overlook that point?
No, and I mean, again, there's about 14.5 billion in the National Pension Reserve Fund. There's a little bit more than that in the central exchequer reserves in the central bank. That will allow us not only to meet the sovereign deficit of this year, but also to invest in a 3-year programme to create jobs. And one of the key issues that Sinn Féin has been putting forward...
The deficit this year is about 19 billion.
About 18 or 19, and we take for 2011 another 2 billion of what would be a projected 7 billion job creation programme over 3 years to invest in jobs in the remainder of 2011.
Recapitalisation of the banks?
Well, our view is this. If you were to introduce new legislation on the other side of a general election, if you were to separate out the private debt of the banks from the sovereign debt, if you were to fully nationalise Allied Irish Bank and Bank of Ireland, and if you were to burn the bondholders in those banks, it would be much, much easier for the merged nationalised bank to borrow its own money on the international money markets.
You think so, really? After we've told the money markets to go...
Absolutely. Not only do I think so, but there are lots of credible international economists who are arguing exactly the same point. It's that the reason why banks, international bond banks, won't lend either to the state or to banks like AIB and Bank of Ireland is because of the huge debts that have accumulated through the boom.
I know that Sinn Féin people in Sinn Féin over the years knew a fair bit about the banks, but I didn't know that you were skilled on the international financial markets. And suppose you're wrong in your guess that the financial markets would start lending to Ireland after we burned so many of them. Suppose you're wrong about that. What then?
Well, the first thing is I don't think we're wrong. I actually think...
I know, of course you don't know.
No, but I think, Vincent, it's a more credible strategy than accepting an EU-IMF deal that's going to cripple the country with debt. Suppose you're wrong, that it's a wrong judgment. Suppose you're wrong. What then? Well, genuinely, I don't think we're wrong.
I know you don't think you're wrong. Of course you don't think you're wrong. But deal with the question. Surely you've got to take into account. You're taking a guess.
No, you're not. Absolutely not.
Of course you're taking a guess.
Absolutely not. You're not taking a guess.
Loads of people have lent you money. You tell them to go and get lost and you're going to pay it back. And then you go to them and ask for more money.
And there are...
And you're confident they'll give you more money.
Sure,
now, suppose you're wrong on that.
That's what happens when countries default. If you
I
look
know.
at Iceland, if you look at Argentina, it's precisely after they've defaulted that international money...
On. Deal with my point. Suppose you're wrong. What then?
Well, first of all...
Armageddon, isn't it?
No, absolutely not Armageddon. As a hypothetical situation, we need to deal with it when it comes. But the reality is that the strategy we've outlined is a much more credible one. I mean, think about it. If we draw down the full 85 billion that's involved in the deal that Thomas's party negotiated, we're going to have debt reservice payments of anything in excess of 10 billion annually.
The question is, if you guys get in, you haven't a bloody clue. None of you in Sinn Féin have a bloody clue about financial markets. You haven't the remotest idea, and I suspect Jerry Adams doesn't even know what they are. So let's forget about that. Let's not have any pretense in that. And suppose your guess that the people who we are now going to default on refuse to give us any further loans.
But Vincent,
what then?
These people are in the business of lending either to banks or to countries, and the reason they won't lend to us is because we are saddled with huge private sector debt as a result of the decisions of this government.
We know all that.
If you
We've
get
heard
rid
this
of
on
that debt,
but suppose you're wrong.
If you get rid of that debt, as lots of economists have recommended, both economists domestically and economists internationally, then those banks will start lending to us again.
Really, yeah. And you're sure of that?
I'm pretty convinced of it, yeah.
Anyway, it's pretty pathetic.
So, well...
I mean, you're taking a risk, and the risk you're taking is with the survival of the state. Well, that's the risk
any decision that any political party takes is a risk, because the way in which the economy has been run over the last 15 years has left us all in such a precarious state that there are risks involved in all of these questions. And I have to say, I would much prefer to take the risks that we've outlined in our economic strategy than accepting the punitive interest rates and the appalling recessionary policy prescriptions of the EU IMF. More cuts to social welfare, more cuts to public transport, more cuts to health and education, and huge amounts of money to the banks, Vincent.
But it's better to have cuts in social welfare and have no cuts and everything than to have nothing. Yeah, exactly.
The risk that you're talking about, that every party must take a risk, but the risk that you're talking about is that come the 31st of December, the 1st of January next year, there'll be no social welfare to be paid out. There'll be no public pay to pay out.
How can anybody seriously take advice from a member of your party who has crippled this economy over 15 years?
The point is,
why should anybody listen to any advice that Fianna Fáil offers on the economy? 400,000 people unemployed. Dramatic cutbacks to social welfare. Why should anybody listen?
Don't harangue him.
All right, I think I'm able to handle it. But anyway, the point is, if you tell these banks, no, we're not paying you back, and then you come looking to borrow more money for public pay and for social welfare next year, you're taking a risk that money mightn't be there. It's not a risk that I'm prepared to take. It's not a risk my party's prepared to take. It's an appalling vista out there.
Your party won't be in government, so your party won't be taking any more risks because you've demonstrated incapable of dealing with the risks of running a market.
Don't harangue me. There are no serious parties prepared to take that risk because it is just an appalling vista. It's Armageddon, as Vincent described it. Nothing to do with the banks. It's to do with people's lives. It's to do with bread on the table. We can't take that risk as a country. That's why we had to go to the IMF, to make sure that we were able to pay for social welfare, for public pay, for public services for the next 3 years, to ensure those public services. That's the reality.
The majority of the funds, of the 85 billion from the EU IMF, are never going to go into paying for public services. They're going to continue bailing out the banks, particularly the worst of the banks, Anglo-Irish and Nationwide. The 12 billion that Fianna Fáil wants to spend from the National Pension Reserve Fund isn't going to go into public services and social welfare.
You cannot
answer
the question. You're unable to answer the question.
No, I'm saying
what
I
happened?
don't think the scenario... Vincent, I know that
you're unable to answer the question. What happens if your guess about the financial markets turns out to be wrong?
It is a guess. But has any bank said that they will lend you money if you don't pay them back? Some other loan. No, they haven't.
There are lots of developed economies.
What happened when Argentina defaulted? What happened when they defaulted in Argentina?
That have defaulted and they were then able to borrow money subsequently.
No.
Iceland, Argentina and other countries.
Argentina hasn't been able to borrow any money on the international bond markets for the last 10 years. They borrowed money from Venezuela, a little bit of money. Their entire middle class fell into almost immediate poverty when they defaulted on the debt. And that's the reality that faced Argentina over 10 years. They've inflated inflation of about 25%, and many believe that's an underestimate. So that's the reality that's facing Argentina. Huge poverty there for a number of years. Yes, the economy might be starting to grow now, but they defaulted back in 2001.
Sure.
So Argentina has had huge problems. It's not a risk that we should be prepared to take in this country. We've secured the funding.
All right.
And I'm not trying to take any credit for the situation we're in. But this
a question. Why would anyone in their right mind vote for Fianna Fáil after what you guys have done?
Well, look, I've been canvassing today, and thankfully there are quite a few people out there who are prepared to vote Fianna Fáil. I mean,
what's wrong with them?
Well, first of all, on the policy issues, we're somewhere in the middle between Fine Gael and Labour, actually, when you look at things. So the reality is, when Fine Gael and Labour get into power, as seems likely from polls, they're going to come up with some kind of an amalgam of policies which will be very similar to what Fianna Fáil has been doing for the last couple of years.
My question is, why would anyone vote for Fianna Fáil? Anyone at all? Because I'm sure your spouse and maybe your mother would vote for you. But why
there are others who are going to do so too, Vincent.
Why would they do it? I don't mean you personally, you're a fine person.
Because some of them, as you described in the Sunday Business Post, some of them think I'm a great TD, okay? There's an element of personal votes around the country as well.
Did I write that?
You did write it, actually. So thanks very much.
That must be one of your weaker moments. We'll change the
Yeah, I think you might have said it on this programme. But anyway, we're somewhere in the middle between the extremes of Fine Gael in terms of cutting public spending and getting that knife, and the extremes of Labour in terms of taxation. We're somewhere in the middle. And Fianna Fáil, in fairness, has always been somewhere in the middle, a centre party. I think people are also impressed, and the polls show this at the weekend, with the fresh start offered by Micheál Martin. The polls show that in terms of who they want to be the next Taoiseach. And he is offering a fresh start.
Having proved your utter devastating incompetence to run this country, and given the devastation you've caused over the last while, why would anyone at all vote for you unless they
the devastation hasn't been solely caused by Fianna Fáil. Micheál Martin has apologised for policy failures of Fianna Fáil, mistakes he personally has made in government.
So that makes it okay.
That's not enough, and it doesn't make. No, it's not enough, and it doesn't make it okay. And our public support shows that. We are now humble at this stage. We've made mistakes. We're paying the price politically.